Welcome to Trista's Plate Story Podcast. I'm Trista Polo from iwokeupawesome.com, and I am your host. Each week, we learn the story behind that vanity plate. The one you saw driving down the road, at the movies, in the grocery store parking lot. What does that say? What does it mean? Why would they choose that? Today's guest, Rich from Pennsylvania, has had his license plate for many years. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, you'll probably know the reference immediately. His license plate for GONDOR represents his love of the series as well as the strength and courage of one of its protagonists, Aragorn. We talk about this, Rich's strong faith, and how important mindset is when facing life's challenges.
Yeah, it's about just picking yourself up after you fall down and just brush it off and keep going.
Let's hear Rich's story. Welcome. We are here on this episode with Rich from Pennsylvania. Rich has the license plate for GONDOR, and I spotted it when I was driving around in Newburgh. It was actually parked in a bus station parking lot. I left you one of my postcards, and you responded, which I really appreciate because that car was snazzy. So I was glad to get to know the person inside that car. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you, Trista.
Now, I think let's jump in about your car because it really did make a really powerful impression on me. Tell me a little about the car that your license plate is on. Let's start there.
Okay, well, it's a 2019 Kia Stinger.
You said it's a limited edition when we had talked earlier, right? How many do they make of this car?
Well, the GTS, which is what this is, they made 800 of them. Some are all-wheel drive and some are rear-wheel drive. But the all-wheel drive ones have something they call dynamic all-wheel drive, which allows it to do something that no other Stinger can do. It can be 100% rear-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive.
Oh, wow. So it's probably pretty safe then.
Yeah, it's done great in the snow so far this winter, and we've had like 5-6 inches on the ground, and I think that's been about our deepest. And done fine,
That's great. Well, it's so pretty that it's counterintuitive to me that you would even take that out in a bad storm or in bad weather because it's so pretty and sleek and sports car-like.
Yeah, well, this is my daily driver. I drive it. I work in Mahwah, and so that's in New Jersey, and it's about a 50-mile commute, and that's one way.
Wow. Well, it's nice to drive in style when you've got to be on the road so much.
Yeah, and it's so comfy, and yet if I feel like I want to do some spirited driving, as they call it, I can do that too.
You can do that too. Although, is it like a red? Because what color is the car?
It's called Federation Orange.
Federation Orange. Yeah, it definitely stands out. So would you say that's sort of like a red car where maybe it's higher on the radar for state troopers?
I don't think so because red has I talked to an insurance guy when I first got my plate, the for GONDOR plate. I had it on a red car. And my insurance guy at the time told me, there's a reason why you don't see red fire trucks as much anymore. It's kind of, the bull attracted to the red color, and it's like, and so I haven't had a red car since that car.
Well, it was certainly snazzy, and I'll make sure to include a picture of it so everybody can see its beauty. But let's get into the license plate. Now, your license plate is for GONDOR. So tell us a little about what inspired you to get that plate. What's the story behind it?
I am almost 60 now, or I am 60 now. But back when I was 20, I read the JRR Tolkien books, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and became an instant fan of it. And at first I was, I liked the character of GONDOR, but then 20 years later I read it and I had a family and whatnot and more life experience, and I reread it again. And this time I was more of leaning towards the character Aragorn, and and he's the heir to the throne of Gondor, but he really has not wanted that position because he realizes that men are weak, and he doesn't have the confidence in his bloodline, if you will, that he would do a good job of being king.
Yeah, but he did end up being king, yes?
Yes, he did, and he ruled for a while. I mean, the story doesn't go into much of his rule unless you read the the appendices in his books, and he goes on to have children of his own and whatnot. But he was, I guess, a pretty good king. He was humble, and he was able to do something that his predecessors didn't do, because the ring of power that is being destroyed, they're trying to destroy throughout the book, is not something that tempted him, and something that he passed that test, where his predecessors wanted that power and were corrupted by that power.
Yeah, you sort of see your life from when you read the books the first time and into your adulthood, having kids, etc. You sort of see your life paralleling Aragorn's life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I see myself. I have my own human frailties and whatnot, but yet I know I have this Father in heaven who wants better of me. And I try to emulate as much of what we see of his son in his ministry, while I'm here. And it's a tall order, but it's something that we're supposed to strive to do, I believe.
Finding the power within us and owning it. Finding that strength inside of ourselves and owning it. Because I think that we are all much stronger than we give ourselves credit for much of our lives. And then when we finally figure it out, we sort of crest it already. At least that's my experience.
I look at life as kind of like we just kind of entered the second act of a play. We don't remember the first act, and when we pass through this mortality, then we end up going into the third act, but we don't know much about that either.
That's right. That's the next series, or maybe it's in the appendices. Now for your plate, it's a pretty noticeable plate. It's a noticeable car. Does anybody ever approach you about it, or do you get any interactions on the road?
I see people sometimes taking photos of the plate, and I think, they're probably Lord of the Rings fans, which, would make them stop and want to take a picture of it. But this car, compared to my Spectra 5 that I did a custom paint job on, and I think I directed you to that site as well, that was more of like a real eye popper for there wasn't much of the week that would go by that I wouldn't catch somebody taking a picture of not just the plate, but the custom paint job that I did that had this Gondorian motif on it, which was the tree of Gondor, and just some of the artwork that came out of the movie.
Yes, and when people check out this episode on YouTube, I will definitely be including photos of that. It was the same plate, right?
Yes, the same plate was on it then, and I think you saw the picture of me in my Aragorn costume that was his royal battle gear, and he had pretty much accepted his role at that point in the film, in the films, even though he hadn't been crowned yet at that point, but that was the garb that he wore.
Yes. Now, do you participate? Do you go to cosplay kinds of events and Comic-Con kinds of events to be part of this world in a bigger way, or was this something you sort of just did on your own?
Well, I did back when the films were, going on. I dressed up for the second movie as more of the Ranger Aragorn, and then for the third film, I had some views of, they did a sneak of Aragorn in his royal battle gear, and so I was like waiting for a better picture of it. And then by October of that year, they came out with an action figure, and the action figure is where I got the design for the costume complete. And so then I started working on it and made my own chainmail and my own armor, and did all the sewing pretty much. But that was something that I wore up in Toronto. They had a big fan gathering there, and probably 15,000 Lord of the Rings fans from all over the world showed up there. And
Wow.
for the first day, I was a walking photo op.
Were you one? I mean, did everybody dress up for that event?
There were a lot of people that dressed up, some as hobbits, some as elves. There were, some people that dressed up as the bad guys, and they had a big opening ceremony, which I was a part of, and
that's
they were looking
great.
for people in costume for that. And so that's still somewhere on YouTube or Facebook too. this whole 8-minute production that they had was videotaped, and they later got a CD of it.
So you were part of the ceremonial piece because you were there dressed in full garb and very close to the original costuming. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it was such a thrill to do that. And I had forgotten to take a camera with me, but there were so many photos I found because of me being a photo op that day that, I didn't have any trouble finding photos.
That's wonderful. Now, was this back in the 80s?
This was 2004.
Okay.
And it was more or less, there were Lord of the Rings fan sites, and that's where I found most of the photos.
So when the movies came out and got really popular.
Yeah. That's when I started doing all the costuming and stuff. And it was 2006, I think, when I bought the Spectra, and then I turned that into a piece of art, basically, and that was my daily driver too, with this Lord of the Rings motif on it.
Now, what happens to a car like that where you've really customized it and you're ready to sell it? Is that something that holds its value? How does that affect your trade-in value?
Well, I don't know, because that car ended up getting totaled, and I had it for about 5 years that way, and then I clipped a telephone pole one night, and the more damage than what the insurance would cover, so it was totaled.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm glad you were able to keep the plate and continue the legacy into your next cars.
Well, it was still a labor of love, and I don't miss it. You move on in life, and the great thing was, I wasn't injured in that, and nobody else was, and
good.
I was at peace, so that's the important thing.
Yes, absolutely. Very good. Now, you had told me that this was not the first plate you had chose. It wasn't your first choice.
Yeah, so when I went to get the plate, I had a red car, like I said, and I wanted the plate to say Anduril, which is the sword that Aragorn uses once it's been reforged by the elves, and it means Flame of the West. And that was taken already, so in Pennsylvania, you have to put down your top 3 choices, basically. And so my top choice wasn't available. So my next choice was for Gondor. And that was something from one of the extended editions of the film they just said this, for Gondor, and they were just shouting that in one of the pieces of the film. And so I'm like, okay, I'll go with that next, because Aragorn is from Gondor and he becomes the king of Gondor. And
Yes.
so, okay.
I think it's a great plate, and I love the meaning behind it. For Gondor, it just creates strength and unity and connection and commitment, loyalty. Like there's just so much there when you know what part of the film that refers to.
Yeah, it's kind of like I went to a Trump rally in December, and when everybody starts shouting USA, USA, it's kind of you get the same feeling.
Right. That connected
you're proud
crowd.
You're proud to be an American.
Yes, absolutely. So we've talked a lot about your plate and, of course, the meaning of it, which is inside of you as well. I'd like to get a little more detail about you. So what
Sure.
do you do for a living? What's your profession?
I'm an electronics technician, and I work right now at a medical device manufacturing company and do repairs of equipment and preventive maintenance.
Oh, okay. And have you always been in electronics and repair?
Since the early 80s, yeah.
Mm-hmm. What do you like most about what you do?
Well, I am a very analytical person. I like puzzles of all kinds, and I like to, do the whodunit type of, things and figure things out. I like playing chess, which is another kind of like you have to think ahead about your moves and what happens if you do this and they do that. Okay, all right. So
strategy.
It's the same kind of thing. Yeah, it's a strategy, but there's a kind of a fulfillment in seeing something that wasn't working before and you get it working, and because you understand how it's supposed to function.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can totally get that. How does the passion for the puzzle and the strategy and the analysis of the solution come into your life beyond your profession?
Well, it's kind of how I got into religion, because I was reading the New Testament and I was having this soul struggle going on. Who am I? Why am I here? What's life all about? And I started checking out different churches, and I would find little bits and pieces of what I found, but never the whole thing. And then I was talking to a friend of mine who had been involved with a church that I never heard of before. And when I went to church the first day, I felt this, the only thing I can say is it was like a whisper saying, this is what you've been looking for. And really, I didn't understand that yet. I was almost in tears when I was just sitting there in church and listening to people get up and bear their testimonies, which is something we do once a month. And I'm like, where is this coming from? but I had been searching for it for a while. And so as I started to learn about it, I found that it had all the pieces that I saw when I read the New Testament.
Wow, that's great. I'm glad you found a place where you could really know you were home. What do you attribute your success in life to?
I think the key to success is being humble, recognizing that, there's this higher power, as some people call it. We lose sight of the fact that we are not human beings having spiritual experiences, but we're spiritual beings going through a mortal experience.
We are so much more than we realize.
Yeah,
sure.
I try to have an eternal perspective on life, even though that's sometimes challenging with, things that go on in your life, from week to week and day to day and minute to minute.
Mindset is so key. And one of the things I believe is that we get to choose how we handle every situation, how we show up, how much happiness there is, how much misery there is, and that it is a choice how we face life. I think it makes a big difference when you can keep your eye on your attitude and manage it. Like sometimes you blow up and sometimes you get upset and sometimes you get downtrodden, but how long are you in that space before you can lift yourself out of it with whatever support system you have to help you do that?
Yeah, it's about just picking yourself up after you fall down and just brush it off and keep going.
Absolutely. What do you do to stay healthy?
I try to get out and walk every day. I'm usually over 6,000 steps, but I try to do 10,000, and so that works out some days. Other days not. You know, it's winter time now, so it's
I know
been more not lately, but you know, now the weather's starting to get good again, and so like yesterday, I think I was just shy of that 10,000 by about 300 steps, but
that's where you just run up and down your stairs a couple times at that point.
Yeah.
Well, that's everything that I have on our topic list. Is there one question that you'd like to ask me? We'll turn the tables on me before we wrap up.
So what is the biggest thing that you've learned in doing these podcasts?
Well, you know, that's a great question. When I first started the podcast, it was really out of a curiosity, and I had never seen anything like this before, where somebody took something that seemed a little benign and like kind of dug into it to see the story behind it. I'd never seen it done with license plates for sure. As I've started to have conversations with people, what I've realized is that the vanity license plate is a window into the person's soul a little bit, because it really opens you up to a little tiny piece of who they are in what they've chosen the plate for. Every person who has a vanity plate has something powerful that led them to make that choice. And it just gives me a perspective of the human condition in a little deeper way than I expected when I started the podcast. It's a great question. Yeah, thanks for asking. So I want to thank you so much, Rich, for being on the Plate Story podcast. I know that we will see you tooling around in your beautiful orange car with 4 Gondor on the plate. We'll wave and beep when we see you, and I wish you much success on your journey.
Thank you. You too, Trista.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Trista's Plate Story Podcast. Please subscribe to get the story behind all those vanity plates driving with you on the road. And if you would like to nominate the owner of a license plate, including you, or visit any of our partners and sponsors, come and see us at platestory.com. That's PL8STORY.com and give us the details. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with all of your friends who are fans of fantasy fiction. I'm Trista Polo, wishing you well on the road to your next adventure.